Today, we're talking about the recent decision from the Supreme Court of Canada about the federal carbon tax. The carbon tax was challenged as unconstitutional by the provinces of Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Ontario, saying that only the provinces have the power to enact a tax the way the federal government has. The law was struck down in Alberta, but it was upheld in Ontario and has now just been resolved by the Supreme Court. The federal carbon tax is here to stay, but don't call it a tax, at least not to the majority of the Supreme Court, who held that the legislation in question, the Greenhouse Gas Pollution Pricing Act, is a regulatory charge, not a tax. I actually participated as an intervener in the Ontario challenge to the federal carbon tax in 2019 while I was in a previous role. I think we might actually have a picture of me in court that day. I can tell you that the benches of the Court of Appeal were never more uncomfortable. Now, today we're going to be joined by 4 experts to talk about the carbon tax. First, we're going to be speaking to Aaron Woodrick from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation and Michael Bernstein from the Centre for Clean Prosperity about the carbon tax as policy. Then we'll be joined by legal experts Dwight Newman and Omar Ha-Radai to discuss what the Supreme Court decision means. Aaron, Michael, thank you so much, both of you, for joining me. Michael, I'd like to start with you. Can you explain to our viewers how this law, the Greenhouse Gas Pollution Pricing Act, works?
Sure. So there's 2 key elements of this law. The first is the fuel levy. That's the one that most people are familiar with. It's the one that imposes a charge on gasoline, on home heating, and several other goods. And then what it does is it takes all that money collected in carbon taxes and returns it to households in the form of rebates, in addition to providing some money for small businesses and for nonprofits. So that's the first part of the law. The second part is an industrial emitters system, which charges large polluters like, think about steel mills or cement factories. And a similar kind of concept there. It's a little more technical, but essentially, they get charged for their emissions and they receive a portion of that money back as a rebate.
And to be clear, this law applies when a province doesn't have its own system in place that meets the federal standard, correct?
That's exactly right. So the federal government says, look, this is the minimum threshold. Provinces, it's your choice. You can put in a system that complies with our minimum threshold. But if you don't do that, we're going to put in place this system for you. So today, you have this system applying, the backstop applying, that is, in 4 provinces, Ontario, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta.
Okay, so Aaron, your organization has challenged the carbon tax as a policy, but also as an intervener in the challenge to the law. Can you explain your view to our viewers what you object to?
Sure. Well, our organization advocates for lower taxes. We are talking about a tax, notwithstanding how the court has defined this in narrow technical terms. So we oppose it on those grounds. It increased costs, and we think that's a burden on Canadian families and on the economy. In terms of the legal fight, we just view this as another avenue to challenge this law. So we were actually the only non-governmental intervener against the tax in all 3 lower courts and at the Supreme Court.
Michael, how do you respond to Aaron's criticisms that this is, essentially a tax, that it's making life more expensive to regular Canadians for essentials of life?
Look, I respect the fact that we want to have a low-cost burden for households and we want to minimize taxes. I think Aaron and I probably agree with that. But the challenge here is that if you're going to do something about climate change, a carbon tax and rebate system is actually the lowest cost way to go about it. So this is actually, in my view, and I'm very keen to hear what Aaron thinks here, but if we're going to agree that we're doing something about climate change, the way to keep taxes the lowest is actually, ironically perhaps, but in fact the case, to apply a carbon tax as long as we send that money back to taxpayers.